You're about to experience a detailed Render Network crypto review that'll describe why I see Render has all the risk of a stock and none of the rewards. This is going to be the fairest but also most critical review I can give because Render does have something real. It's not just another fake AI or depend story, but the more I study Render, I see a project where the real value depends upon a business system outside the token and outside the blockchain. Thus, I, based on this information, have no desire and feel a bit hopeless about the future of the Render token, which is why I'm doing this review so that you can have this information too. This is not financial advice. In full disclosure, I have 6,500 ICP. That's where I see the best of crypto, and you can watch more about that on Jerry Banfield ICP. So I've reviewed this because you all have asked me in the comments, please review Render. So here it is. Render looks on the surface like a serious investment while having all these narratives that are very easily hyped up by crypto influencers. But my main thing I see that's a problem is Render is acting like it's a stock, but it's not. It's a token. And we're going to go into why that's such a critical flaw and makes everything super questionable about the value of the actual token. To begin, we need to talk about what Render is, and we're going to go deep into the details. This outlines 2,400 words. We're going to go deep into the technical details, which you need to understand in order to see the critical issues here that I don't see how they're going to be able to overcome these in the long term. So to begin, Render is a GPU marketplace. It's not sovereign infrastructure. It's not, as you'd imagine, this whole worldwide, all these decentralized computers working together. It's a marketplace. It connects people who need rendering or AI-related GPU work, but it has extreme limitations with that as well when you get into the details. And you connect to work with node operators supplying GPU resources. Now, this is real utility, unlike the majority of coins in crypto. But the actual work, and here's where the big problem is, the actual work depends on off-chain software, off-chain hardware, onboarding, integration, support, and operations. And none of that is contained or controlled by the token. So this is not a self-contained protocol where the token itself creates and governs value. This is a managed business system with a token attached. That distinction is absolutely critical and for the future is extremely problematic. Now, I understand why people get bullish on Render. I've watched some of the hype videos, and I thought about buying Render a couple years ago before I did this level of research myself. The bull case is easy to see and understand. There's real demand for GPUs. The AI demand and the rendering demand is real. The founder is public, which is great because most coins, the founder is not public. And there's a company called OTOY, which is very critical to the success of Render. Thus, the bullish Render narratives are extremely easy to say, and I must put those out there so that you know I'm aware of them. Like, this is the very first thing you would know about Render. What most people don't know is the rest of about what I'm going to say. Almost all the hype and almost all the substance on Render sticks to this, and this is not even relevant information once you get deeper into what's happening. Now, yes, there's the Apple, there's the authority signaling with these partnerships, but are those partnerships, how much depth is there? I'm extremely skeptical on partnerships myself after 12 years in crypto because they usually mean nothing. And that's why these narratives need to be handled carefully. These are narratives that often imply merely compatibility or visibility or ecosystem adjacency, rather than implying that there's a real amount of business being done. So I see them for narrative strengths primarily, but worse than that though, they strengthen the business case more than they strengthen the actual token. You see, because there's private businesses wrapped up around all the other things, and then the Render token is trying to leech some of that value. It's not a stock, where if it was a stock, you would own the whole business system. If this was all a stock that I could buy and Render and all that would own all this stuff, that would be different. But this is very complicated than having a token and talking about a decentralized marketplace, but then heavily dependent upon all these private things surrounding it. That is extremely problematic, and there's so many ways that can go wrong. because the main value comes from all these software integrations, partner relationship, support systems, pricing logic, OTOY. And as a token holder, you don't own any of OTOY, which is a private company, very important, all this running. The token holders don't own the software IP, the customer relationships. They have no shareholder rights. So when you buy the Render token, what exactly are you actually getting? That's the real problem. You're getting exposure to a private company adjacent ecosystem based on decentralization without legal benefits of actually owning the company. I mean, do you see how my mouth is having a hard time putting all these things together because they do not make sense logically altogether? Render looks nothing like sovereign crypto infrastructure and more like a pseudo equity with no real equity protections. This is extremely serious. As anyone looking at investing in this is extremely serious. Like, this is, a deal breaker for me. And we haven't even started tearing the rest of this down yet. So with the real product itself does not automatically mean a good token. And this is where almost everybody gets fooled. Now, even though the marketplace and the GPU network do work and there are real frames being processed through it, how much of that value is actually going into the token rather than adding value to the company, the software integrations, the business partners, etc.? So the overall product and ecosystem and the token are not the same thing. And you can see this when you look at the migration history. The token started on Ethereum. So this is a token. This is not even its own blockchain. It started on Ethereum, then moved to Solana, and then changed the token name from RNDR to Render. And if you had the token on Ethereum but didn't successfully complete the migration, you could have lost your tokens there. And then on top of that, the holders already had to deal with these upgraded portals, exchange support, and I've seen people lose money when tokens do this. So to me, that's a huge trust red flag, but it makes sense for their business. But for the holders, the Ethereum holders had to go through all these hoops to get over to the Solana based. That's not a little operational detail. That's evidence that this is not a simple, timeless protocol native infrastructure. This is a moving product stack that requires coordination, trust, and support and continuing cleanup from a centralized group of people. Then you have them putting the tokens, bridging them onto other chains like Polygon to try and get additional value to their token. And then the legacy contract was deprecated after unauthorized access happened. This shows that on top of all the other problems, there's additional contract risk, legacy infrastructure risk, migration risk. So if something happens with Solana, that could take the Render token down, and even the bridged versions on other ones could cause problems for the token on Solana. Thus, the amount of risks that are present in this token is ridiculous. And the amount of ownership or real value you get out of it, to me, is almost all speculative. This is just too much exposure, and a history of showing even just moving the token and having it in different places has resulted in serious problems. Now, the bulls will talk that, well, burn and mint or BME is the answer. And yes, usage links tokenomics are better than pure fluff, because most crypto is nothing more than pure fluff. But burning tokens does not turn a utility token into ownership of the business system that's producing the usage. Does that make sense? That if this centralized business system surrounding this is trying to make this token have value, whatever value the token has is still primarily speculative and totally dependent on all the centralized parties that are managing all this off the blockchain and not related to the token. And then there's the additional migration risk. And this is all a complex off-chain ecosystem too. There's just so many places where this can break and fall apart over time. But here's where it really starts to get ugly. Let's look into the maintenance nightmare, the fading hardware risk. This is one of the most understated problems with Render that the bulls are not likely to tell you about. Maintaining a decentralized GPU network. And again, I don't see real decentralization anywhere. I see that there's a marketplace with GPUs all over, but that's not the same as saying the token and everything involved with the token is decentralized. I don't see any true meaningful decentralization. I see that there's a network, a marketplace, and like eBay. eBay has all kinds of sellers on it, but I wouldn't call eBay decentralized because there's one centralized entity who has control over the marketplace. And the way I see it, there's a centralized entity that has control, like the founder and the companies associated with this, they have control. So I don't think this qualifies as saying decentralized GPU network at all. This is a marketplace of GPU networks. And then when you factor in the H100 gap, which we'll talk about more detail in a minute, this completely falls apart. The short version of that is that while hypers are saying that, AI and it's going to use all these GPUs and all this computation on render, that's not how most of the time high-end or even mid-level AI training is not going to want to use render, because you don't want to use a bunch of scattered customer GPUs and then wait on the latency of all of them. So the distributed design is a narrative strength, but it's a technical liability and a nightmare and unusable for high-end compute. Again, typical crypto where the narratives and the hype, and when you investigate it yourself, it all looks disastrous. So let's talk in more detail about the latency problem right here. This is where the GPU issue really hits hard. Right now, when you're trying to have these huge VFX files across the distributed network of residential internet connections, that is painfully slow compared to using centralized data. The whole value proposition with render is that people are going to just put your GPU on this network, and then people who need serious rendering are going to want to use it. But why would they use slow residential GPUs of low quality compared to what centralized networks can offer? So even if the compute exists, the workflow can still be annoying, inefficient, and structurally weaker, which means most of the time, what would be chosen would be a centralized, optimized rendering platform. So not render, but most companies would want to work with the best hardware and would want to pay the centralized companies and not render. On top of that, right now, token incentives are keeping the supply online, the supply of GPUs. But the obvious question, when emissions matter less, is will market rate rendering pay enough to cover electricity, hardware depreciation, and operator attention? I doubt it will. If not, then the network depends on hype era subsidies more than people want to admit. In other words, this looks like a very short-term project. I don't see how this will last the test of time successfully, as GPUs, the existing network GPUs, keep getting more and more worthless, and you keep needing better and better equipment to keep the marketplace relevant and current, and then the token incentives go down, and if the price ever collapses, the whole thing it falls apart. As I said before, the decentralization story is very weak, and it's even weaker when you start looking at curated onboarding and trust services. Node onboarding is curated. Hardware requirements, narrow participation, and reputation systems can be gamed. Job approval can auto-pass, which creates quality risk. This is not a picture of clean, decentralized infrastructure that the holders imagine. And this is research you could do in an hour or two yourself to look all this stuff up. It's a managed network. And a managed network, eBay is also a managed network. It's a managed network of buyers and sellers. It's not decentralized. It is a managed network. Render is a managed network from what I see. And the centralization creep, I don't see any way of that going away. If OTOY remains deeply central to the software and the integrations, which I don't see how it's not at this rate, there's no like future where this gets more decentralized. Like, it's just a token. The reality is render is just a token sitting on a blockchain Solana that has very limited off-chain capabilities. Thus, you're going to have OTOY or some company or centralized group of people run everything. If the foundation and curated nodes matter too much too, it weakens this further. And the governance can be driven by large holders in the foundation, but then the foundation can just veto or do whatever it wants anyway. So the whole community-owned framing looks I don't see how that makes any sense. The more you look into this, the system, it looks extremely centralized. And this is what we're seeing come out with some of these other coins when people are brave enough that are involved in these projects to tell the truth, and then they actually get publicity. Like with a recent BitTensor Tau interview, they're like, this is centralized. Like, this is not, if you're not doing what they want you to do, you're not getting, it's not working out for you. So the long-term risk of this to me looks extremely high. I see very limited upside and huge, so many ways this doesn't work. The emissions are declining over time. which means the hardware of the network is unlikely to be able to keep up in a rapidly advancing hardware environment. The GPU suppliers can leave at any time if anyone else makes better yields. There's nothing that commits them to render network. Other depends can also come along and compete. But to me, the biggest problem is centralized giants like Amazon, Google. They all have all the scale, all the funding, all the customer relationships, and all the reliability advantages. So the narratives that it sounds like exciting. Like, oh yeah, we're just going to start rendering all this stuff here and leave big companies behind. Not from what I can see when it comes to AI and medium and high end rendering. No, you're not. The centralized companies have the best hardware and the best setups, and they're so much better than using something like render. It's ridiculous to even think hardly anyone would want to. Now, there's certainly some use cases, but how much have those use cases even been incentivized to talk about working with render? That's something we don't know, but I would suspect in many cases, there have been incentives to promote the use of render to try and sell the token. Thus, all this is a huge long-term disaster lining up. And when the day comes where this starts to collapse, I can say, told you so right here. And I pointed out exactly how it would happen. Now, even as you dig further into it, there's more issues. So I've talked some about the tech, but the GPUs and AI workloads evolve fast. The software has to be upgraded. The integrations have to be maintained, and the onboarding has to get easier. So this means inevitable long-term dependency on OTOY and a very high risk that the network just can't keep up. Because if the token price doesn't appreciate with speculation, the economic incentives don't line up, it all goes down. On top of that, there's regulatory and cyclical demand risk. You got payments, which can create legal and compliance issues. Again, it makes companies just look at, why would we mess with render and this token when we could just go straight to some centralized provider that has better hardware and less legal and compliance issues. Plus, the GPU usage can attract scrutiny, which the centralized companies have already figured those angles out. The AI data privacy concerns keep rising. Are you going to be safe rendering your data through render when you've got it rendering on people's GPUs at home on their computers? And then the demand for rendering in AI can be very cyclical, narrative-driven, and hype-sensitive, so that equals unpredictable. And what you want for a successful business is generally predictable. But the main trap of all this is the value accrual trap. Even if for some reason this does actually beat all the problems I've listed here, the service ends up succeeding because of OTOY's business execution primarily. And in theory, they could have a successful business and the token could totally fail because the token does not equal the business. The token doesn't own the business and is not a stock in the business. So this to me sets up a situation where if they wanted to, OTOY could launch a different token and come out with a different narrative if they wanted to, and totally abandon render if they felt like it. And the token holders would just be left standing there looking silly while they continue to make profits. Now, I'm not saying they would do that or they're planning to do that, but because the token is not a stock, there is almost no accountability that token holders have over OTOY's business. And that's a problem because the render token is extremely dependent on OTOY's business. Now, to me, this is one of the absolute worst parts of all this, but it's more technical, so I saved it towards the end here. So render's AI narrative runs into a physical wall with what we would call the H100 gap. This is not just about Nvidia chips being hard or expensive to get. It's a fundamental architecture divide between distributed consumer hardware. That means a bunch of people all over the world having GPUs in their computers versus centralized enterprise clusters where all the GPUs are sitting in one large data center right there next to each other. And this is where marketing around render absolutely breaks down, especially when you watch, the hype videos. They don't want to talk about this because it all looks ridiculous. So the hardware wall, the high-end AI workloads increasingly depend upon massive VRAM capacity and memory bandwidth. That's the reason the H100 became an industry standard. Consumer GPUs like my 5070 that I have in my computer can be powerful, but they're not built like top-tier enterprise accelerators. If a model needs 40, 80, or more gigabytes to run comfortably, then most consumer-grade nodes are at a disadvantage before the real work's even started. But it gets worse. So this means render's network distributed GPUs can sound impressive in aggregate while not being an appropriate fit for real heavy AI workloads. Here's where it gets worse though, the interconnect problem. So serious AI training is just not about the quantity of GPUs you have. It's about having all the GPUs in the same place, connected the same way, and so they can all talk to each other constantly, instantly, and at extremely high speeds. In data centers, those machines are packaged with elite interconnections that have all been very carefully thought out and engineered to, maximize, every nanosecond in the whole process. On a distributed like render, these GPUs are scattered across the public internet. That creates a massive latency and bandwidth disadvantage. Do you see what I'm saying? There, you are looking at renders competing with optimized, specialized, very well engineered buildings that have all of it right there. And then you're trying to compete using the public internet with GPUs on people's computers. Massive latency and bandwidth disadvantage. And do users working with AI, are they going to tolerate long waits? I mean, I asked ChatGPT something, and if it takes more than 20 seconds to respond, I'm already over on Gemini or Grok asking it the same thing. You can see the problem with render here. Even if you try and combine a bunch of customer GPUs, that does not mean you're creating the performance of a real H100 cluster. The math doesn't work. You can't just trade enterprise AI clusters with a pile of gaming PCs across the internet. So this means render is much better suited for asynchronous workloads than synchronous ones. That means they don't all have to be done at the same time. Synchronous means you all got to run everything at once and keep it all aligned. If one movie frame takes a little longer, that doesn't matter that much. But in large-scale AI training, every delay compounds. Waiting for a distant node or some GPU on the other side of the world means you could destroy the performance. That means render's distributed nature can be perfectly fine for some rendering and inference tasks, but it's a major weakness for high-end AI workloads that people imply it can address. And where's the real opportunity? It's in the high-end AI workloads. It's because everybody can have hardware and stuff that can do low and medium end stuff. But the high end, and when you listen to hype, you would think that render's out there to do this high end stuff. Render leads towards inference rather than training. And yes, there is a real use case there, but smaller models and lighter AI tasks can run on cheaper consumer hardware more cost effectively than premium enterprise chips. But that creates another problem. If render is strongest mainly in lower end or mid-tier AI inference, then it starts looking like less like the high-end infrastructure and more like a commodity marketplace. And commodity marketplaces do not deserve the kind of scarcity premium that hype cycles assign to them. So render is trying to market itself as, this AI that can handle, some AI compute super cycle, and people imagine it as some incredible network that can do these amazing things. But from what I've just showed you here, it cannot handle high-end AI workloads. And therefore, there's tons of solutions out there. You can run low-end stuff directly on Internet Computer Protocol and get all the blockchain benefits for it. So the render not being able to get up there into the most in-demand, highest level means that its utility is extremely limited. And it's never going to be some serious thing that, from what I can see, that dominates serious AI training. It is useful, as it just like eBay's useful. And if I could buy eBay, if I wanted to buy eBay stock, that'd give me some real ownership of the whole business system. But the problem is render, the reality of it is a much smaller and less defensible story than the broad AI narrative can make it sound. I mean, this is something valued at a token that's valued at like $1 billion. That means there's a very high probability, to me, based on what I've shown, this is drastically overvalued based on the real value it can do. So render is not like a world computer or a serious replacement for top tier AI infrastructure. It's okay for niche rendering and low-end inference, which to me makes it not that useful, because as everybody else is trying to scale up their AI systems to be able to process, there's just going to be more and more medium and low-end stuff that's available out there that's discarded or not even used by those that are focused on the high-end stuff. So the low and medium end continues to plummet. And then you're not even actually holding any of all the stuff that supports this with the token, as I said before. So render is trying to make it look like they're building some global supercomputer, but in practice, it's a token that's a middleman for a centralized company that is getting together a pool of gaming PCs that can't communicate fast enough because they're scattered all over the internet to do the heavy AI workload. So what exactly are you getting with the render token? Like, it's very questionable of why this would be sustainable. Then when we compare with ICP, it gets even worse because ICP already has the ability to do low-end AI stuff directly on the blockchain. And that is huge because then it can be tamper-proof and secure and verifiable, and that does matter. So for low-end AI stuff, ICP is already the best infrastructure I see for that. And whether or not ICP gets adopted, when you look at ICP, that everything is directly on the protocol and the token is used to govern the actual protocol itself. That's the setup I would wish Render has, but it doesn't. Render is much narrower. Most of everything is off-chain and much more dependent on all these surrounding things that are off-chain. So when I look at the two of them with similar valuations, ICP looks like real infrastructure and Render looks like a token that is trying to have value given to it by off-chain centralized entities with decentralized marketing. It's crazy. So I don't know, I might put my imbalanced conclusion would be better on this. My imbalanced, I respect that Render actually does something real. There is a real marketplace. The team is public. There's genuine usage in a niche where it can make sense. I do love the idea that in theory, I could connect my 5070 graphics card and I could run it on Render, but would I even get enough money to cover using the rest of my computer that much and, degrading my hardware and the electricity? I'm not sure, personally, if it'd even be worth it to try and connect my computer to Render network. But what limits my excitement, I think I've been very clear about. The partnerships are real, but easy to overstate. The business case off the chain is much stronger than the token case. The off-chain dependency is massive, which ruins decentralization. The migration history is a clear liability. The decentralization story to me has very little reality to it, any more than saying eBay's decentralized. And the hardware and latencies realities seriously limit what this can even do. The long-term maintenance burden is heavy, and the token holders think they're essentially holding a stock, but they have none of the rights or ownership. So, I don't think Render's fake, or just a meme coin or anything. The service, the use case is real, but the token looks very weak compared to the product, and the product is not impressive to me either. Thus, the Render is a real business-like ecosystem, but as a token investment, huge risks. I don't see much upside to this, especially as more people get educated, look into the details of Render, question the value of this long-term, see reviews like this, talk to other people, do their own research. This very easily could fall apart. So for this reason, I am all out on Render, not interested in it. And I appreciate you watching all the way to the end. If you do want to see the one crypto I'm very enthusiastic about based on the real technology, you can subscribe to my Jerry Banfield ICP channel. If you have a crypto you want me to review next, drop it in the comments. I've got a list. I bump up what I'm going to review. You guys were going nuts about Render recently, so I got the Render review done. If you look through my other crypto reviews on this channel, Jerry Banfield Crypto Reviews, you'll see my thoughts in a similar format on other cryptos, which I hope will be helpful for you. And if you want even more Jerry Banfield, I have everything from YouTube coaching to gaming to dating and life coaching videos that you may enjoy. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Oh, and if you want me to review your entire crypto portfolio, you can go to jerrybanfield.com and schedule a call with me.